I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The 2000s was the best decade for music, especially for pop punk and emo. I don't think there's ever going to be another time in the mainstream when these two genres are as big as they were between 2002 and 2009. It was inescapable. You had bands like Fall Out Boy becoming like huge celebrities, being plastered in like gossip magazines, appearing on TV shows like Seventh Heaven.
Hi. Pete?
You had My Chemical Romance releasing genre-defining albums. Paramore demolishing any kind of competition they had, setting the standard for all female-fronted pop rock bands to come. And these bands had legit radio hits, and many of them are still remembered quite fondly today, being seen as not only legends within pop punk and emo, but in the broader music world itself. And a lot of that can be owed to the albums that they released around this time. From Under the Cork Tree, The Black Parade, Riot. These are all incredible classic albums. But what about the bands and albums that aren't as lauded as the ones I just named? What about them?
Who cares?
Sorry. Hello and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, I'm Trevor and I am eternally uncool. I make videos about music, music culture, and anything that interests me. But mostly music right now. So if that sounds like something you'd be into, then I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and watching the rest of this video. Emo, much like punk and grunge before it, became a commodity. What was once a subgenre built around musical expression became more of a fashion statement and stereotype. Emo went from vulnerability in lyrics that contrasted with a more hardcore influenced instrumentation to fringe bangs, skinny jeans, and monster energy. Major labels were chomping at the bit for the next Dashboard Confessional or Fall Out Boy, so they preyed on these small bands and signed them like that, only to forget about them when the genre inexplicably ran its course in the mainstream. And a lot of these bands were truly unique and special within their own respective corners of emo. And they released albums that should have been classics in the vein of A Fever You Can't Sweat Out or Take This to Your Grave. But for whatever reason, they're not. Maybe they got overshadowed by bigger bands with a similar sound. Maybe they were just too ahead of their time. Maybe they were too of their time. Whatever the reason, they were left behind at the end of the decade and forgotten. But not by me. Oh no.
I never forget.
What I want to do today is take a look at 4 forgotten emo albums released in the 2000s. I'm going to be kind of loose with the definition of emo here. So with all that being said, grab a drink. I've got this Monster tour water that's been sitting in my fridge for about a couple of months now. Never got around to trying it. I guess I should now. That's water. Grab a drink, grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's get into the video. In the 2000s, emo concept albums were perfected by bands like My Chemical Romance and Coheed and Cambria. You had other albums like The Ugly Organ by Cursive and Trainwreck by Boys Night Out, but My Chem and Coheed were like the kings of concept albums. I love concept albums. I'm a huge book nerd with a background in film and theater, so I love when my music has an interesting storyline and kind of more performance. I've always dreamed about creating my own concept album. I always wanted to make it as if it was like a play, with all the audience sounds and atmosphere. Unfortunately, I am not a good musician, or lyricist, or YouTuber for that matter. I just have really cool ideas. But fortunately for me, a similar album already exists. And honestly, it's better than anything I could have ever come up with. The album is Razia's Shadow, a musical by Forgive Durden. Forgive Durden was a indie rock band formed in Seattle in 2003. The name was taken from the character of Tyler Durden from the Chuck Palahniuk novel and movie of the same name, Fight Club. And the band's only consistent member was singer, songwriter, and guitarist Thomas Dutton. Their sound is kind of like a mix between the Get Up Kids and Panic at the Disco. It's very indie, but Thomas Dutton also has these very, emotive and theatrical vocals. Razia's Shadow is the band's second and final album, released in 2008. This concept differs from what My Chemical Romance and any other band who did concept albums at this time was doing, in the fact that it is a musical. And when I say musical, I don't mean it's merely just a rock opera. This is like a musical with a cast and characters and everything. There are several guest vocalists who take up different characters. You have Brendan Urie from Panic at the Disco, Max Bemis from Say Anything, Sean Harris from The Matches. It's a star-studded event. Dutton didn't give much away in terms of what the story of the album really is. In an interview with Alternative Press, he only stated that the story is told in two halves. The first half is the creation and ultimate division of the world. The second half is the story of destined love and the world being reunited as one. Fueled by Ramen, who released the album, gave a little bit more of a better description on their website, saying, "The album tells the story of a world divided in two by the selfish actions of a powerful and egotistical yet insecure angel. After generations of darkness, the world is eventually brought back together by the love and sacrifice of a couple brave enough to fulfill their destinies." Each song on the album has a much deeper description of what it's about in terms of the story, but to describe them all here would make this video way too long. Maybe one day I'll do a deeper dive into Razia's Shadow, but not when I have 3 other albums to talk about. The album really does seem like this big Broadway show with its orchestration and multiple vocalists. There's an amount of theatricality here that I haven't really seen in a lot of other emo albums.
And that's saying something.
It feels like more than just a collection of songs. It feels like more than a track list. It feels like an actual story being told and performed instead of musicians just playing and singing the song. Does that make sense? This doesn't feel like just a Forgive Durden album. It really feels like a collaborative effort between everyone involved. Sure, Thomas Dutton plays a majority of the instruments, but it doesn't feel like it's all about him as the sole performer. All of the other vocalists showcased really add a lot to their respective songs. As far as concept albums go, I'm surprised this one isn't talked about more. It's so unique in its concept and execution of that concept. You have all of these different emo singers coming together to tell a story. They're all playing their own little part. Not just a guest vocalist like, hey, I'm singing this part in the song now, see ya. But really playing characters and doing something. I don't think I've ever seen something like that done before, or since. If you're a fan of the more theatrical trappings of emo, Razia's Shadow is definitely an album for you. It really speaks to my inner theater kid, which I thought I buried years ago when I dropped out. It's a fun album that has a lot of energy, uniqueness, and entertainment value. Highly recommend.
Tonight the sky is painted melancholy, and the wind sings songs as if it would by man.
I feel like a lot of bands and artists were doing concept albums in the 2000s, but none of them were getting as much attention as My Chemical Romance and Coheed and Cambria. For good reason. They were incredible bands. But I wish more concept albums from this era got the love they deserved. Because there's so many, and they're all really good. Discussing Razia's Shadow reminded me of another concept album from around this time, Volcano, by Gatsby's American Dream. I discovered Gatsby's American Dream as well as this album through my older brother. We used to go to Borders Books together and he would drive because I was a child. He'd play music and that's how I discovered a lot of the music that I like today. And I remember one song that must have been on a mix CD or something. It blew me away because it was so dark to my young ears, but yet so fun to listen to.
We came here on a plane, just a bunch of little boys.
This song opened up a whole new world for me. I hadn't heard music like this before. A song based on Lord of the Flies?
Hell yeah.
Now, did I know what Lord of the Flies was when I first heard it? No. But that didn't hinder my enjoyment of the song. I was now a fan. Well, kind of. At the time, I only liked that one song. But as I got older, I would develop more of an appreciation for the whole album as well as the band themselves. The album is essentially about exploring human emotions through their similarities to that of a volcano.
Krakatoa!
While also intertwining it with the story of Pompeii, famously lost after the explosion of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. Little history lesson, bet you didn't think you were gonna get that in this video. Along with Lord of the Flies, there's also allusions to things like Lord of the Rings, Interview with the Vampire, and the greatest cinematic achievement of all time, Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
You don't want to get mixed up with a guy like me. I'm a loner, Daddy. A rebel.
The sound of this album is definitely a bit more on the indie side, with some elements of pop punk and even progressive rock sprinkled in there. Whereas Razia's Shadow was theatrical in a traditional sense, where it felt like a play, Volcano feels more in line with the theatricality we saw from a lot of emo bands in the 2000s. It's the showmanship in the performances of these pop-punk songs. That's what makes it theatrical as opposed to just theatrics. Am I making sense? If you're a fan of emo that leans more into the indie vibe, as well as having a more literate influence, I recommend checking out Volcano and Gatsby's American Dream.
Everything we had is over. I made mistakes, you said goodbye. Don't let me catch you crying. Everything we had is over. When it falls apart, I won't be there. I won't be there.
The first two albums I talked about on this list I described as theatrical, which is a word that can be applied to most emo of the 2000s. Many of the bands took influence from punk, some from heavy metal, and some from glam rock. All of these genres are very performance heavy, incorporating style, flair, and theatrics. One of the things that attracted me to emo in the first place was the vocal performances of a lot of the singers I discovered. You had people like Brendan Urie, Patrick Stump, Gerard Way, Hayley Williams, all of these vocalists adding an extra layer of talent and flair to their respective bands. But there's one band with great vocal performances that no one talks about. That band is Bedlight for Blueeyes.
Darkness settles in and I want to dream. Yeah, soundscapes and lullabies deliver me. Yeah.
Bedlight for Blueeyes hail from the emo epicenter of the 2000s, New Jersey. They were active between 2004 and 2009. The peak years of the emo explosion. They toured with bands like Newfound Glory and Senses Fail. They had 2 albums, one of which reaching the Billboard charts, but yet they never seemed to get as big as their peers. And I think that's crazy, because they came out of the gate with straight fire. Their debut album, The Dawning, is a perfect mix of emo theatrics, hair metal guitar licks, and 2000 rock vibes. Frontman Christian Guerrero's vocals are so good, practically soaring in some places.
Overture of ecstasy, over and over and over again.
It's kind of hard to describe the sound of this album. There's alternative rock, a little bit of pop punk, a smidge of post-hardcore, all wrapped up in a blanket of emo. Songs like The Nature of the Ghost feel like they fit perfectly between Senses Fail and the Red Jumpsuit Apparatus.
Desire takes a turn, a body makes you burn. You dance across the pits of hell to taste her.
The Dawn is just a great album to jam out to. It's perfect for someone like me who likes to pretend he's a rock star while listening to his favorite albums. Air guitar and everything. It's a pretty sad sight. It's just a fun listen with some catchy and engaging songs, as well as some kick-ass vocal performances. Highly recommend this album if you're looking for a fun time. One of my favorite styles of emo is the style that leans more into soft indie rock. Sure, I love the post-hardcore and pop-punk versions of emo, but there's something about the indie rock bands that just makes their vulnerability seem more genuine. There's a sincerity there that is much more obvious than its more aggressive and energetic cousins. And one of the most memorable bands of this type from the 2000s, at least for me, is Daphne Loves Derby.
Don't ask me if good intentions will change everything. This could be the last day that I hold my breath and stay awake for you.
Daphne Loves Derby is a Washington state-based band formed in 2001. They gained a lot of attention through the website Pure Volume, which was pretty much a precursor to Bandcamp and SoundCloud. They even held the #1 spot for Pure Volume's unsigned artist before getting signed to Outlook Music, a branch of Universal. On Outlook Music, they would release their first physical album. I say physical because they released digital albums, I guess. I didn't do that deep of research for this video. The album was called On the Strength of All Convinced in 2005. This album feels more comparable to something like Augustana as opposed to Fall Out Boy. Songs like A Year on an Airplane and You vs. the Sea really exemplify what Daphne Loves Derby do best. This laid-back indie pop style of emo. It's very pretty, very soothing, very nice. On the Strength of All Convinced is a very nice album. It's laid back, but still has a little bit of that 2000s vibe and energy. It still has all of the vulnerability that you'd expect from a 2000s emo album with its heart on its sleeve lyricism. It's a good album for anyone looking for something a little bit more chill, a little more indie rock as opposed to pop punk. If that sounds like you, then I highly recommend giving Daphne Loves Derby a listen. Yeah, this was really disappointing. It's really just water. I don't know what I expected. What do you think of my list? Do you like any of these albums? Are you gonna listen to any of them? Are there any other underrated emo albums from the 2000s that you want me to talk about? Let me know in the comments. That's gonna do it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then I highly recommend smashing that like button and sharing this video with everyone you know. I am a small independent content creator who does everything on his own. I make no money from this. I do it just because I love talking about music. So every like, every comment, every share, any interaction with this video at all really helps me out a lot. With all that being said, thank you for watching. As always, I'm Trevor. Stay uncool. And that's the end of the video. Goodbye.